Hi there. I am going to be penciling here the comic book page from the story Last of Its Kind, a story I wrote on an assignment for ImagineFX. I've sort of roughed out the first panel here. It's a long, tall panel. You can see it's a fairly awkward shape for a computer screen, but it kind of works on a flat page. I'm sort of roughly penciling out a perspective buildings. These are all sort of free-handed perspective, which I'll go in using Manga Studio's own perspective rulers. I'll be able to basically tighten up a lot. You see that big thick sort of line that appeared there? That was from using the shift and the pencil tool, and basically that allows you to draw a straight line from one point to another. So here I'm drawing the second panel, which is sort of a closer shot of the old man and the tree, a close-up shot of the old man and the tree. I'm still noodling the design work of the character here. What I'll do later on is I will go in. I'm putting these things roughly in place now, but as I tighten up the pencils, I'll start googling some reference, and from that Googled reference, I'll change the drawings and how they work. And you see I'm sort of making my mind up about the panel sizes and how much room needs to be in each of them and where they need to go. This is just sort of a rough penciling stage. It just gives me a sense of how big these panels are, and you can see I've drawn a couple of tails of dialogue lines where the dialogue's going to go. And then later on, I kind of effectively these just allow me to get on with drawing without referring to the script too much. So I kind of draw all the stuff that I think is important from the script. So then whenever I actually go in to draw again in pencil, I'll be reading it for dialogue and to make sure there's plenty of room. You can see I'm trying an eagle eye shot looking down on the old man and the robot here. It doesn't quite work for me, so I'll take that away again. I'm using a pencil tool called Pencil Side On, and essentially that allows me to hold the Cintiq at an angle, or the Cintiq pen at an angle, and get very bold, thick lines. And it actually acts as if you're holding a pencil. So you can, as you would hold a pencil side on and rub along along the page, you'll get sort of rough detail. Seem to have taken a break. There we go. Sort of pencil again. So attacking this third panel again. You can see I've sort of been thinking about this panel and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it. And I've gone for a kind of close-up shot of the back of the robot and the old man further away. I'm trying to keep in mind the kind of angle that you already see these characters at, so that you can see them. As you're reading it, there's no sort of sudden jump from one place to another, so you know where these people are. So this panel here is the kind of reveal of the futuristic robot, the new robot, which in the end actually, although I'd penciled him and described him as a new robot, it felt a little bit more mysterious, not to really know whether it was a human or robot, superhuman or what. It just felt like something that, the more mystery was there, the better. And this final panel, I kind of, as described in the script, was basically a close shot of the old man cutting the bonsai tree, but it just felt a little bit more powerful. It was just the bonsai tree. So moving then on to the next stage of this, I'm going to start creating panels. And you can see here I can use in Manga Studio's own cut frame border tool. I'm just cutting the panel frames along. And that's given me a neat sort of panel borders where I want them, and I can now start sort of repenciling, knowing exactly the size of those panel borders. So I'm sort of going in with the pencils and just tightening up. At this point I'm sort of googling images, so I'm googling reference images, googling the bonsai tree while I'm working. Googling bonsai tree. I think I actually googled old man, old avuncular man, which kind of changed the look of the old chap altogether. I'm going to go back in and attack panel 1. So I've given up on panel 2 there. There we go, panel 1. Created a folder here which is going to contain a lot of perspective rulers. So I'll start with panel 1's perspective ruler. And it's just, if I keep all of my perspective rulers in one folder, I can turn those guidelines off, or I can hide those guidelines as I need to. And you can see I'm moving the guidelines from around to sort of match up the kind of loose pencils that I've already done. There's a lot of tweaking at this stage, just tweaking to get those exactly where I want them to be. Micro Studio's perspective rulers are hugely advantageous when it comes to drawing anything in perspective, but they can be a little rigid. So as you'll see here, I'm going to use them to lay out a sort of building shapes, but that's alright if you're drawing 1960s Manhattan, but if you're trying to draw a sort of far future cityscapes, it's not quite as curvy or as organic and free flowing as you might like. But I mean, it's amazingly quick and easy to sort of start building perspective boxes. And what I'm concentrating on here really is giving myself some sort of guidelines to work at. So I'm not going to get too detailed. I'm not going to worry too much about whether there's a window or not a window. I'll just sort of start penciling in shapes. And you see, I mean, very quickly it's a convincing building. I've gone in with a slightly thicker pen just to pick out some of the details there. Again, you can see how something like this would be massively advantageous if you're drawing a superhero swinging from rooftop to rooftop, or leaping down on a villain in the dark. So because this perspective grid is contained is on a folder, it actually applies to any layers drawn within that folder. So it saves me having to tweak and draw new ones. So I'm laying out now positions for vehicles. These are just to give me some sense of where some vehicles are going to be. Still very boxy because the tool basically only allows you to sort of draw boxes. You can turn the tool on and off as you're drawing, so you can go back in and kind of draw rounder, softer shapes as I'm doing here. Odd futuristic looking cars. I'm trying to sort of set the scene as being somewhere far future, maybe definitely alien to what we're expecting. And flying cars will always be far future, because the reality is that flying cars are very limited sort of use, and when you've got hundreds of it all have to be robot controlled. But it suits the story, because the story is essentially about our advanced civilization, possibly robot controlled. So right now they all look like they're flying along Manhattan or somewhere, but we're going to very shortly sort of take the buildings that we've drawn here and kind of add curves to them and make them look a little bit more odd and peculiar and futuristic and a little bit more designery. Adding plenty of traffic. I want to sort of make it look like there's a lot going on here. I sort of gone into another false start. There's an awful lot of false starts in this, where I've sort of started drawing a 1930s style Art Deco futuristic, which is sort of okay. It's not really doing it for me. So you see, I've started adding more and more curves in, and the curves are sort of suggesting something a wee bit more futuristic than or a bit more alien than the Art Deco, which is nice. I mean, I like a nice Art Deco futuristic thing, but it's not quite doing it there in this. I'm basically freehanding all of these shapes in now, but these are just another layer of pencils. There you go. I've decided now. No, I'm going to get rid of that. There we go. Adding a very kind of peculiar looking. It's a bit more sci-fi looking now, a bit more traditionally sci-fi. Not unlike the kind of great Carlos Esquerra style buildings from the early Judge Dredd. And you can see I've spotted a theme here. BWS is an old comic book term meaning black with stars. I'm going to put a moon there. Nope, I'm going to put a moon there. I think it's a heavily bit cliched, but it sort of looks like an ornament of some kind on the building, and I like that idea, so I add a little bit more to it. Another organic curve in there. And it's shaping up much more like something I'd be happier with. The one thing though is it's too high up. The whole that whole panel there is way higher up than it really should be, because you want to have room for your dialogue and caption and your text. I've kind of rasterized the frame, so what that does is takes the frame guides that I've set up and creates a fixed page, which allows me to erase and move those panels about and so on. And you see this is sort of what those pencils look like now. At this point I've sort of moved that down a bit because it's just, you want to leave plenty of room for dialogue and captions. The good rule of thumb is always 25% of the top of any page should be, or top of any panel should be dead space, basically, space left for captions or text. I'm drawing a centre line down this old guy's face now. I say I've sort of dug up some reference here at this point. It's going to radically change the look of this chap. Here we go, big moustache. It's not as radical maybe as I might have been, you might have been expecting there, but it gives you more avuncular kind of face, slightly older fashioned looking. It's not what you'd expect. And it keeps the contrast. It keeps the contrast of this sort of futuristic with this kind of old chap. Just darkening up the pencil lines. Brown glasses on there. Wrinkled brow. Based on an actor whose name I've forgotten. So, I'm sure you can play guess. If you're watching this, you'll be able to guess who it is. I can't remember. So adding some, I kind of, this heavy shadow is really a feature of comic books for me. It's sort of, it's only really comics that get away with that kind of heavy shadow, and it's almost like lighting as you'd find it in theatre or 1960s Star Trek or something. You want sort of heavy drama in the lighting at all times, really. Even when the lighting doesn't actually make that much sense. So you can see here I've drawn this guy's face, but I haven't really drawn the tree yet, and the tree's going to be in front of him. So some of that face is just going to have to go. Take for a break. There we go, we'll start chopping away at the tree, forgive the pun. I've clearly googled a pair of shears here for a bonsai tree. Even when you're doing heavy sci-fi, you sort of want to be able to reference real world stuff. You want your readers to see that quickly, sort of stretching and making that head larger, just to enhance the close-up nature of it. Still gives us plenty of room behind him, sort of framed for the robot. Just filling in some heavy blacks here. Now his panel's sort of taking shape now. You can see
how it's going to look when it's inked. I'm still struggling a little with the design of the robot, but having googled some sort of medical robot type technology, um, again sort of real world inspiration mixed up with various things, sort of webcam head instead of the sort of human looking body that I had before. It gives me something that's sort of nicely believable, but at the same time, obviously in advance of what we have now, but not so far in advance, which is part of the point of the story, is that this robot is a relatively simple one. And let's see, just toying with the idea of adding some background in here. A panel like this, you don't really need that much in the way of background, just some suggested lines to give a reader a sense of sort of that they're inside rather than outside. We've already sort of established our scene with that big building in the first panel. Any dialogue is going to be assumed by a reader to come from that building. So now we've got a sort of fixed design of the robot. Keeping that in mind, I can kind of go in and start drawing behind and go behind there. Yeah, keep referring back to that other panel. You can see I'm shifting the view down to look at it, so I can sort of. This is the danger of designing on the page. You sort of design something, and then as you're working, you realize you've got to go up and have a look at it again to make sure you're consistently drawing the same thing. And again, that design will change as the inks go onto it. Stretching it a bit, making it even larger again. So all about contrast and making sure that things like that sort of look closer, heighten the drama. Just correcting the shoulder. A little bit of back in there, but it's going to be mostly in silhouette, so almost entirely pointless. Now the old man. Zoomed at about 41.8%. The danger with Manga Studio, danger with any digital drawing is getting too close to the page and drawing in insane detail that you can never ever see when it gets printed. Actually, what I'd normally do on this particular job, I worked at the page size for print. Ordinarily, I work at the page size as it would be drawn, which is typically about 40% larger than print. And what that allows me to do is it allows me to mix sort of traditional drawing, drawn by hand on a piece of paper with some ink, and scanning that in and working digitally, and then taking the digital, printing it out, and inking it or penciling it again and scan that in. So sort of there can be quite a round robin. I mean, currently most of my technique is down to hand pencils, digital corrections, scanning those pencils in, fixing them, moving things around, changing angles, adding panel borders, putting in any perspective that needs to be done, and then printing that out as a blue line grid, or as a blue line print, and then inking it traditionally by hand. And then sometimes I'll do that, and then I'll scan it back in again and re-ink things or redo things in the computer. I've kind of found that often I'll find a pattern that works for about 6 or 7 months, and then I'll change it. It'll all get changed up into something else. So I'm sort of drawing, keeping the movement, keeping the characters as if they're moving by having them slightly askew. As you can see, the robot's head's tilted towards the man, his body's tilting away practically. I mean, that's just what the reader's going to assume at any rate. So now our futuristic new robot, or whatever he or she or whatever it is, but 90% silhouette. So we're literally gonna let the reader make up their own mind as what they think it is. I'll just draw in, let's fill that in, bucket fill. robot again. Trying to get a sense that the robot's left the old man in that room and is coming out. I don't know if he might be on tank treads. This is again, the danger of design on the page is I haven't quite figured out what method of locomotion it's using, tank treads or whatever. Or I've seen things that use sort of this weird mixture of three wheels, and so I've sort of roughly penciled in where the old man is, and now onto the last panel. And again, this is kind of a cropped close-up of the new robot's face. I mean, it could be alien, could be superhero, could The thing is, it's kind of lovely having the reader decide what that is, and the idea that they could argue about what it is or not is nice, and just bucket fill in some of those areas. Mega Studios Bucket Fill is actually, it's a glorious tool. It's got a close gap option which allows it to sort of automatically, you can fill an area, and if there's a tiny gap between bits, instead of filling out everything, it'll close that gap for you. It does what it says in the tin basically. It also has the ability to sort of detect what's underneath and use multiple layers to bucket fill, or even to bucket fill based on a specific reference layer. So for example, you could have flat colors in a reference layer, and then you could use your bucket fill, and it would fill the layer you're working on based on the colors in the reference layer. Again, the same tool, the same methodology can be used with the Magic Wand color, the wand selector tool, where you can actually use a reference layer and just sort of select colors there. So I'm sort of noodling some circuitry on this thing, but on this future robot thing, but it kind of occurs to me that it works far better just pure black. I keep, sometimes you work away on something, you chip away and chip away and chip away on the basis that something will come up, and sometimes you find that the first thing you had was the best thing. And again, the bonsai tree. There's one of the things with Manga Studios, and well, with all digital drawing, I suppose, is there isn't really the traditional sort of pencil ink stage. You can do that, and that's certainly the way I work. But on something like this, for example, I could quite happily have gone straight to inks because I knew what I was drawing, and really, there's it's got such an element of organic randomness to it that you can't really go wrong. You can certainly you can maybe undo things that you don't like, but sometimes there's no sense in penciling something that you can equally just ink. I've erased the panel border around it because I think it just looks that wee bit better without the panel border on that particular image. So at this stage now, what I'm doing is I'm sort of separating some of these pencil layers to concentrate on some things and repenciling them. Some of the stuff that I've done kind of scrappy and loose. Again, it's this sort of thing. Actually, I probably could have inked straight off the pad. It was probably detailed enough, really. But as I think. There's possibly an apocryphal tale about Alan Davis, who once asked Mark Farmer, who's an inker, that when they were establishing their relationship as inker to artist, Alan Davis said, "Look, I don't care how you ink everything else, as long as you ink faces and hands the way I've drawn them, then everything else, nothing else matters." And that's kind of true. But, as long as you get the faces and hands right, everything else is sort of, up for grabs, really. Especially in comics. Obviously in traditional art, I think there's a huge difference between the skills in comics art and the skills in fine art or illustration. There's storytelling's involved in both of them, although storytelling is absolutely the key skill in comics, and it's it's a different kind of storytelling. It's not. It's reliant on more than one image. You've got to be able to narrate a story over a sequence of images, which is what comics are really. Um, and you've got to be able to keep consistent character designs. And one of the reasons that character designs often end up being quite simple is because you've got to redraw and redraw these characters over and over again. You've got to be able to do it in a recognizable way. Sometimes you can cheat that nearly. For example, the glasses, the balding head here, and the moustache are all big sort of they're big signs that scream this is the same person. Even if you get some of the details wrong, if you don't quite get the ears in the right, exactly the same place, or you don't quite get the mouth shape exactly the same, the rest of it's doing much of the heavy load of making sure that your reader will recognize the same character over and over again. I should really have just inked straight to this, but again, I'm just sort of tweaking the pencils. There's always something on a page that you enjoy drawing more than other things. For me, it was this tree and this guy's face on this panel. You can tell because I spent far too long just on penciling something, which I knew was working anyway. You get a sense of what's working and what you need to draw and what you don't need to draw anymore. Um, all in this page took about 2 hours to pencil. Um, and that's about average for me, really. 2 hours a page for pencils. Inks took about 5 hours though, and a lot of that was to do with the building. The buildings in panel one. You see I'm sort of chipping away at different bits and pieces. I'm not sort of sticking with one particular thing. I always think that's the danger with digital comics, and you move those eyes, it definitely weren't looking right at all. The danger with digital comics is you can leap about from one thing to another and never quite finish one panel. Whereas with traditional drawing, I will pencil one thing before moving on to the next thing. So it's totally penciled and off you go on to the next thing. But you're never quite done on digital. You can always pencil that, and you can add another layer and pencil that, and add another layer and pencil that, and keep going. So you have to really watch you have to watch that you don't do that. You have to watch that for the kind of mistake that it is, really. I would say this is the second time I've drawn this page. The first time it was all completed, but it didn't really sing enough for me, and that was largely, I think, because I didn't quite have a handle on the characters and how they were going to be drawn, and there wasn't quite enough tension and drama in the proportions of the characters. There was quite a lot of mid shots, and I think in comics you want to be careful that you've got a kind of rhythm of, you want a close up and a distance and establishing shots and so on. You want to have that rhythm in your panels, and different sizes of panels as well, and that just sort of adds to the interest. Every single thing contributes to how interesting the page is. You see, I'm just sort of checking to see whether that looks alright or not. This is speeded up about 300%, I think. So it actually, I don't draw quite as fast as this, and you'll be relieved to know this isn't the full 3-hour video. I'm still sort of tweaking and looking at it, and it's sort of working right now. I'm needlessly going in and adding white. To get a sense, and it's the danger again. It's you sort of get confused about whether you're inking or penciling. There isn't as clear a demarcation line between the inking and penciling stages there would be in hand drawn. It helps if you've got a sort of light pencil texture, as I'm using here. But and I try as well. I try and keep as few layers as possible. I try to sort of only use layers, a new layer if there's really a good reason for it. I don't see any particular benefit in having a 200 layer document beyond, you've got to find, for example, it would be very easy, and Manga Studio allows you to do this, to build a frame folder, which is sort of one panel with every single panel can have its own folder, and each of those folders can have then a pencil layer, an ink layer, a ruler layer, and so on, all within those panels. But then it becomes an absolute nightmare whenever you need to repencil a panel or page. So it's just far easier, I think, to stick to one panel, or sorry, one layer when you're penciling. So one layer becomes all of the pencils in one go. It means then you can easily go in and correct something. So it's only if, for example, one particular panel's being very stubborn, or having to fight with it, or if I think there's some particular reason I'm unsure of it, that I'll create a specific new layer. But I mean, almost as soon as I've done that, I'll typically merge it back in again so that it's all still within the one layer. But part of that might be the advantage of working in pure black and white, as this page is. You don't need you don't need to have all these multiple layers for different visual effects because you're not really doing any of that. Move that head back a bit, tilt it a little. It's easily the best advantage to digital working is the ability to just go in and move things around. Just adding some detail to the robot. I kind of want it to look, as you would expect a sort of lumber and medical robot would look. There's nothing in there that really wouldn't seem peculiar or out of place, and to anyone that's ever dealt with an industrial robot. The little X there indicates that this area is going to be filled with pure black. That's a standard comic convention. I could flood fill it, obviously, but it's sometimes quicker just to put the wee X in there and just move on to the next bit. In the old days, again, traditional drawing, pencils would often be handed off to an inker, and instead of sort of colouring in a full black area, a penciler would put a little X to indicate this area is going to be pure black, and the BWS, which you saw earlier, would indicate this area is going to be black with stars, because you're drawing superhero books, you're going to draw an awful lot of black with stars. And if you have a really great inker, they can add so much more to something like that than you would ever be able to do by penciling and having someone ink it. Just chipping away in the silhouette of this kind of alien new robot guy. You see, I'm going to ignore all of the circuitry that I've built into the other pencils. Sometimes a lot of skill in a drawing is knowing when enough is enough. There's plenty there. Don't overthink it. Move on to the next bit. Sometimes that's because your deadline is pressing down, and sometimes it's because there really is nothing more to add to it. In the background, there are little sort of random. I'm from the school of people who would have seen 60s computers on TV, and they were always banks of lights and whirring devices that didn't make a lick of sense, but always sort of suggested these are a bank of computers. Again, I'm repenciling this tree. I don't know why. I think it's madness. There's just really no need to pencil it. I could quite easily have inked it. I'm sort of drawing big, thick, straight lines now too, which is. I should have spotted they were too thick the first line I drew instead of 4 lines into it. It can happen. I think really secretly I enjoyed drawing the bonsai tree, so that's why I'm drawing it again and again and again. I didn't enjoy drawing the leaves though. Oh, they were a pain. You can tell you sort of the first few you go, oh, these are going to be, I'll draw this like this, and then as you go along you kind of go, oh no, this is not working, now I'm going to have to do this another way. So you get that. Still a bit too high up there, so we'll move that down a bit. There we go. So we'll align the sort of bottom of the plate of the bonsai with the base there. That face is just a bit wrong. Move that, tilt it up a bit. A little bit better. I've given the old chap a lumberjack shirt. I just sort of feel like it's the sort of thing he would wear. Um, it sort of nicely says, I really don't care that I'm in the future. I'm wearing a lumberjack shirt. There we go. Save that. Would you believe I hadn't saved that until that moment? That was stupid of me. That's almost, practically 2.5 hours of penciling. That would have been a nightmare if I had lost all of that. Save often. Though luckily my studio seems fairly robust. I mean, it's been running for days and days and days. I literally non-stop for days. I don't switch my computer off. It just sort of sits there at night, because I go, I would finish work at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and up again at about 7. So um, the process of coming out of everything is quite involved. So we're drawing another tree just sort of slightly in front of the old guy here. Just in front of him enough for you to know that he's turning back to this tree, but not so much that he's kind of, you can't see his face. Penciling that shirt is a sort of distraction from doing any proper penciling. That's the kind of work that you can do while thinking that you're actually doing something, and you really aren't. All you're doing is drawing. You don't see it until you look at the video afterwards, and you go, "Why was I drawing that shirt?" And then you realise, well, it's because it saved you having to make any hard decisions about drawing the bookshelf and the mirror that's going to be beside him and all these other bits and pieces. And now I like the shape of the back of the robot, but he just seems too in front of the guy. I'll maybe come back to think about that later. Just having a look at all the pencils that are complete so far. Still got to do this panel. I'll move that down a bit because it seems to belong slightly lower down. Mica Studio keeps a little menu option of what you can do with selected stuff just down at the bottom of the selection, which is handy. It saves you having to run up and down to the file edit screen all the time. I've loosely penciled a lot of sort of perspective stuff in here, which I'm going to go in later and add a proper perspective ruler and actually draw it in proper perspective. It's usually fairly easy to fake this stuff, but you don't have to with Mica Studio. You see here I'm trying to sort of figure out exactly what size that guy would be if he was in the mirror and its location to the robot. It's one of those. It's going to be one of those things like the TARDIS. It's not quite exactly the same inside as it is outside. Our friendly robot again. I quite like this little guy now. He's got a little personality of his own. So penciling this robot. Shadow, shadows, pencils, shadows. He's backlit from the other room. He's not really though. This is just a sort of a ploy to make it look more interesting, visually interesting. I like to play with lighting to give readers something to latch onto. I'll move this guy forward a bit. That gives us plenty of room beside his head there for dialogue and captions or whatever. So what we should be seeing here now is the old guy in the looking through the one-way mirror. But I'll be honest, every time I thought about this, my head kind of went into a bit of a loop, and I wasn't sure whether it was if he was in the right direction or not the right direction. So I think I penciled it and then flipped it. So it's just a pencil on him there. So I'm going to start creating some perspective grids for some of these other shots. This is panel 2 in perspective. And the perspective ruler is locked onto this one single layer. So what I'll do is I'll just use this one layer to draw sort of perspective elements on this one page, or in this one panel, sorry. And then whenever I go to actually ink that or repencil it, I'll just use straight line tools rather than lock into the perspective grid because it's more flexible then. Perspective grids or perspective rulers were a feature of Manga Studio 4 EX, which was a sort of professional level of Manga Studio. Manga Studio 5, although there is an EX version, which at the time of this video isn't out yet, the plain vanilla version of Manga Studio 5 includes perspective rulers, one point, 2 point, and 3 point. So now I'm just building the perspective here for this other background element. It's not something that's strictly speaking necessary, but it's even a tiny amount of correct perspective can be spotted by the eye. You see a couple of lines there is enough just to suggest the background there. Final perspective point. I went off into a bit of a wrong area. There you go. That's a silly place for a perspective vanishing point line to be. 2 vanishing points over to the far left, just aft. So undo, move that back again. What I should really have done there is a single vanishing point, but again, these are kind of almost abstract shapes that I'm literally just putting in for the sake of having some background in there. Their dialogue will go on top of these and so on. And the reader's attention is focused on the people in shot and those areas of heavy contrast, so they're not really even going to see those things. This is just a single point perspective. The perspective, as well as locking you to a vanishing point, the perspective will also give you straight up and down lines as well, or rather, it'll give you straight lines to the eye level and 90 degree to the eye level. So I'll just put all of these into a single folder called perspective grids. Although they're not strictly speaking grids, but moving them all into one folder means I can then sort of hide or show all of those, because they're going to be my guides for whenever I actually go to ink it. I'll create an inking layer